Okay, good morning, everybody, and we are happy to be back with our webinar, How to Communicate Science. And I hope that you enjoyed yesterday, and now we will dive into the more practical of the how to communicate our science, isn't it, Miguel?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and I'm happy to sort of have this as a part of our work package activity. But I would like to say first that this will continue. Please sort of follow our news. We will have this kind of webinars quarterly, and I'll give more information at the end of this webinar. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I will switch off my camera and share the presentation with you. Okay, so again, how to communicate your science with some practical examples. And very shortly and repeating a little bit what we said yesterday, the structure of this webinar was supposed to talk a little bit about who I am, if there's a lot of new people out there, why am I here? And while yesterday the communicating your science was split into 4 different parts, the audience, the strategy, the narrative, and some tools, today we focus on the tools. And this will also be split into 4 parts: the words, the story, the visuals, and a little bit about digital platforms. And because yesterday it worked really well, the questions and the interaction with the audience, I tried to maximize it a little bit today. And I will start with the 2 questions that I'll ask Katrina to launch to you. Basically, the first question is if you attended the webinar yesterday, and if you want another brief overview of the 4 topics: the audience, the strategy, the narrative, and the tools. Okay, so thank you for those who attended yesterday and are here again today. I think in terms of the second question, there's the large majority feels that there's no need to repeat this again, and so I'll follow this recommendation. And for those who would like to have an overview again, I will share probably tomorrow the presentations, and also following Jens's suggestion to have sort of the main keywords for the 4 different topics. And also the video will be available in the website, so hopefully that will be nice for you to have an overview again. Okay, so moving on, and I will skim through the next slides because you already know who I am and why am I here, and the communicating our science, the audience that is very relevant to prepare your message, the strategy, so addressing the questions of the what, how, why, when, where, are the questions you should address, preparing the narrative using storytelling concepts, and the tools. And so today we will try to make some practical examples. Initially, this was prepared to be a workshop with people in the room where we could have some exercises and have everyone actively participating and doing their own exercises and sharing the results with the group. Here it's a bit more difficult, so I'll give some examples. I'll give you some homework if you want to, and hopefully the questions I'll be asking will try to be a little bit more interactive between what I'm saying and all of you who are listening. So today we'll focus on words and sentences, either as writing or as speaking, building a story, using visuals, and a little bit about digital platforms. But I'll be honest, most of the focus will be on words, sentences, and story. and visuals and platforms will just be a few examples and some opinions I have, because this would be just another webinar on how to build visuals and use digital platforms. I showed this plot yesterday in terms of the trend that we see in US presidents' inaugural speeches to have shorter sentences in their speeches, but this is also observed in many other situations. And this is a plot I found about the same trends in the English prose, and you see that is really a marked decrease in the length of the sentences, so the way we are using sentences. The key part is, how do we apply this to our communication? And I've put here 3 examples. The one on the left is a paper I co-authored last year in Science. So let's say a high impact paper. The middle one on maps, I will label it as a thematic journal in marine biology, marine ecology. And the third one is just a title of a paper I found from 1955. So let's say an old paper. I don't want you to go through the abstracts, it's not the goal. I did that exercise myself. So I calculated the number of words per sentence, and we see that in the science paper, we see an average of 16 words per sentence. In the maps, we have an average of 20. And when we go to the paper in 1955, the average word per sentence was 36. So we also see a trend here. I'm not going to say if it's a significant trend or not, if the number of words between science and nature papers and more thematic journals are different or not. There's a trend, and I think there's probably extra care when we're writing a high impact paper. Sorry. And perhaps that is why this difference. But to be honest, I've also checked other papers, and they had quite extensive number of words per sentence. So this is not something that you see in all publications. And my question to you is, when you're reading papers, do you find some abstracts that are easier to read, or is there a trend that you've been that you feel that there is out there when you're reading papers? And so I'll ask Katrina to launch a question, and basically, what do you think it's the easier abstract to read? When you have a thematic journal like marine biology, marine ecology, a high impact paper, or if a publication when there's a graphical abstract. I must say I agree with the trends that we're seeing here. So, but this is my opinion. I think when we are working with high impact journals, there's really a lot of attention to every single word we put in the abstract, not only from the author side, from the editors and reviewer side, definitely. I must also confess that sometimes I read papers in Nature and Science, and I have a really hard time to understand even the abstracts, or sometimes even the titles, because it's a really great advance in the knowledge, and that's why it has been accepted for publishing in such journal. But sometimes it's so detailed and so in-depth in that topic that it's very difficult. I must agree that graphical abstracts are available, are an important tool, and becoming, let's say, something not mandatory in some journals. But and myself as an author as well, I haven't put a lot of effort in preparing graphical abstracts a lot of the times. Sometimes I use a figure that is already prepared. Sometimes I try to make something in PowerPoint that looks nice, and that's what I've always did as a scientist. Now that I have this company with designers in our team, this is a game changer, because it's when I realized that I'm really terrible at doing graphical abstracts, and I shouldn't try to be a designer, because that's what they have been doing for their whole life. I think graphical abstracts are really helpful, and in my company, we have a collaboration with the Journal of the World Aquaculture Society, and some universities ask us to do graphical abstracts when they want to send a press release about a paper. But it's also true that we see a lot of terrible graphical abstracts that don't say a lot. It shows, you know, a bar plot or a scatter plot. And I think the take-home message here is, yes, they are important. If we are presenting one, let's try to do a good job and put some effort into it, and don't follow my example of what I did a few years ago, because it was something that it was mandatory, and we were just submitting a graphical abstract without putting enough effort into doing a good one. It was just something that it was mandatory. So in terms of words and sentences, it's important that you know really well what you are going to talk about, and this is the subject. When you consider what is the verb, you have to know exactly what you are going to say about it. And something that is a common practice is to avoid repeating the same words in the same sentence, repeating the same phrases, or repeating the same idea in different phrases. And a third level would be to avoid repeating sounds within the same sentence, because for those who will be reading, it makes it a bit more complex. I'll show you here a couple of examples, and this one was taken from, well, I created based on another paper, and I think it's a bit complex. I'm going to read it, okay? So, in order to diversify, organisms must be provided with ecological opportunities to diversity. So it's already wrong, which can be found in empty niches. Another example I see very often is something like, in this study, we have observed that fish do this or do that. Another example is, there are several factors affecting the abundance of zooplankton in the water column. Community composition also responds to environmental parameters, particular temperature. And I would like to ask you, what is the problem of the last example? Is it too long? Is it too complex? Is it just unclear? There are details missing? What do you all think? Okay, so we see that some people think it's a bit long, but most of the people say it's just unclear and details missing. And I totally agree. The example was basically to show, I don't think the sentences are too long. They could be shorter, but when you write a scientific paper, it's difficult to make this kind of sentences shorter. But the truth is that it's unclear because there are details missing. There are several factors that affect the abundance of zooplankton in the water column. So the next sentence should be, what are those factors? And but the next sentence just moves into community composition. So it's when a reader is reading this sentence, the main idea is, yes, there are factors that affect abundance. What are those factors? And next, we move to the idea about community composition. So in terms of the previous two sentences, the examples I want to show is that we can write things more simply, and we can say exactly the same idea by turning the sentence around and start by saying, ecological opportunities to diversify can be provided by empty niches. And what you see here is that the idea comes first. So what really matters is what drives diversity, which is caused by the ecological opportunities to diversify, which lastly can be provided by empty niches. In terms of the second example, it's something that I used to write a lot because I'm a Portuguese, I'm not a native English speaker, and in Portuguese, we say the sentences very complex and very long. And in this study, we have observed that fish, but we can just simply say results show that fish. And so this example is just to say that when I was writing my first few papers, I was always writing in a complex way. But when you read what you've been writing before, be critical about it and think if all those words are needed, or if you can just move on and skip to what really matters. So now I'll go for a practical example that I would ideally like everyone to do. And I'll show you a bad example and a good example, hopefully. And this was a paper that I've published, I don't know, 15 years ago or so. Well, I was finishing my master's and I was working with a company working on detection dogs in ecology. And I'm taking this as a bad example. So, and I was doing most of the writing in this publication. Here is the abstract. I don't want you to read the abstract, please. What I want to tell you is ideas should come first. So what I did was I underlined the first few words of each sentence, as you see here, and I'm going to highlight them. So when we look at the first few words of each sentence, and it's not only one or two or three, well, let's say the few words, we can read management of avian populations. Currently, these estimations, detection dogs. We evaluate the accuracy rates. Furthermore, to verify the efficiency, results indicate that. Furthermore, carcass decomposition condition, the influence of these factors, and results demonstrate the usefulness. So if you're reading an abstract and you're just skimming through it, you're probably going to be more focused on a couple of words, and usually these are the first words in the sentences. And these would be the words where you would focus your attention. And the question I have to you, and based on the narrative construction we talked about yesterday, and I'll ask Katrina to send the next question, is what is the solution to the problem that this paper is addressing? And I'd like you to tell me, if you don't even understand what is the problem, if the solution is that dogs and humans are equally accurate, if carcass decomposition is just simply key, or you have basically no idea because this is not enough information for you to understand. Okay, well, I'll leave the others to say what they think, but it's clear that most people don't have a clue about what is the problem or have no idea. And although I had a very active participation in the writing of this manuscript, I also agree that if I read these words, I have no idea about what is the solution to the problem, and maybe not even the problem of that this publication is addressing. So I'm happy that you share with me that this is, let's say, a bad example. Now I'm showing a paper that I wrote with some students as a senior author 3 years ago. And I don't want you to go through the abstract again. The title, you know, it's about marine ecology and little shrimps that live in the coastal area in Brazil. And I hope that this can be used as a better example. It's not the perfect example for sure. So I underlined again the first few words of all the sentences, and I grouped them here. And it says trait-based differences among individuals. The shrimp, Hippolyte obliquamunus, two main color morphs. We used carbon and nitrogen stable isotopes. We observed morph-specific trophic differences, niche segregation between morphs, and resource availability and stability. Again, without going into detail, I'll ask Katrina to launch the next question. Do you think it's more clear, the message here? Definitely yes. Well, maybe, you know, it's not perfect. or no, it's just equally confusing? Okay, so definitely better. I agree. It's a better example. It's not perfect, you know. The message is not totally clear, which is fine. But what we want is that the reader is motivated to read our paper more carefully. And so if they have interest and if they get the main idea by reading an abstract, they will definitely download the paper and read it in detail. So remember, the main idea should come first in the sentence. And the bottom line is here is, you know, you should have short and simple sentences. The idea should come first. You should avoid repetition of sounds and words. Be precise and avoid being vague. I know this is, you know, standard to everyone, but when you're editing or proofreading your manuscripts, think about this again for each single sentence. And this will allow you to improve your writing, both scientific and non-scientific writing, and also to prepare contents for any kind of other communication. So this can be even an exercise on how to extract the information that is really key from your findings, from your science, and to communicate it to other audiences. And a little homework, and this would be an exercise to do with the audience, you know, use abstracts that you wrote in the past or from leading authors or scientists that you really acknowledge and admire in your field, and do this exercise. And most of all, learn from their mistakes and learn from the good examples as well. So moving to the story component, we yesterday covered this a little bit in terms of having the setup of, well, the structure of classic stories with the 3-act structure of a setup, a conflict, and a resolution. We talked about how we could take advantage of this structure in terms of better communicating our findings and having the scientific structure of the state of the art, the problem or scientific gap, and then your solution and findings. And we will do this exercise now. So picking up on the last abstract I showed you, we can have a first sentence that can be identified as state of the art. So basically, trait-based differences among individuals are common and particularly important in polymorphic species. This can seem quite complex. Of course, it's a scientific paper. We show that species with polymorphisms rely a lot on differences between individuals. And in this case, we talked about color differences. Why is it relevant? Well, some sentence within this abstract says that 2 main color morphs can be found in these habitats. Okay, well, why is it relevant? Is it relevant for the community composition, for the evolution of this species? Of course, that relevance depends on our audience, but in this abstract, we are focusing on a very specific audience, scientists. The problem and the question was to test whether morph-specific patterns of habitat use influence trophic niche segregation. I know this is a lot of complex words and probably difficult to assimilate in such a fast manner that I'm communicating now, but the problem is really to understand if the differences we see in the colors have any effect in the trophic structure and the way that the community works and eventually the ecosystem food web. Results, so main finding is that we observed more specific trophic differences that vary with habitat. So this means that the different shrimps with different colors eat different things, and the way that this varies changes with habitat. So there's an interaction with habitats. And then implications, so resource availability and habitat stability, which can be directly linked with pollution, eutrophication, climate change, etc., are likely driving dietary niche segregation. And this will affect the success of each color morph, affect population dynamics, community composition, etc. So what I did here very fast, and this should be done, in a 15-minute exercise was to go through the abstract and try to identify what is the state of the art, the problem, the main findings, and the implications. And our goal here is to use this to build a 3-act structure that is based on simplifications, illustrations, and personalize the story in order to be able to inform, inspire, and engage. So things that we talked about yesterday, and also the 3 elements of persuasion that a story should have in terms of credibility, emotions, and a logical argument. So based on this example that I gave, I would say that the 3-act structure can be split into 4 points. So as you see, it doesn't have to be very strict because we can split the last act in terms of our findings and solutions and what does it matter. So I could just simply say that there are differences among individuals. There are color differences, there are behavior differences, and this happens in shrimps, in dogs, in humans, everywhere. And the question that we addressed here, how does color affect the way that these animals use their habitat? We found that color affects trophic niche. So basically the resources that they are exploring for their nutrition, and this varies or this interacts with habitat. And lastly, what are the consequences of these findings? Is that we now know that habitat stability and the availability of resources are going to affect population dynamics. I know this is still very scientific jargon-rich text, but this will be the basis for communicating your science. So the homework that I'll give you is to do this exercise. So go through an abstract you wrote, go through an abstract of another paper you read and that you found interesting, and prepare 1 sentence per topic based on a scientific abstract, and remember to use the active voice. Going a little bit back to what I said before in terms of illustrations and make it more personal, this is what you should do if you prepare this message for different audiences. You can talk about the habitat where they live, make a connection to a vacation you made when you went to Brazil or to the beach side, to talk about if you remember when you were kids and you were playing around in the beach and you were playing with those tiny shrimps in tidal pools. And these are simple ways to make people to visualize what you're saying and provide examples, differences among individuals. This happens for tiny shrimp, but also between us and as humans and our pets, our dogs and cats. So you can use these ways to make it more simple. The next exercise would be to tell this story, but focusing on a different audience and thinking about the audiences that we, let's say, label them to yesterday, the policymakers, managers, NGOs, scientists, media and public, and the different interests that they have, which will drive the way that they effectively receive your message. You should change the way that you're telling your story, or at least frame your story so that you trigger an interest and emotions on the receiver. So based on this story that I told you about, this paper on shrimps and color morphs, I could write that diversity among individuals is key for the resilience of biodiversity. Individual differences are key for the evolution of species and for driving biodiversity. And this sentence could be applied to many of the audiences on the left side, but I would say even to policymakers, because voters will probably care about biodiversity. I know this is quite a bold statement. Some people don't care about biodiversity, but it's a way to try to engage people, to give some value to the research that is being done on the drivers of biodiversity. Another question is, or another way to pose this is to talk about habitat stability and pollution eutrophication. that affects the biodiversity in coastal areas. Who do you think it could be the audience of this second sentence? And I'll ask Katrina to send the next question. Managers, do they care about eutrophication and biodiversity in coastal areas? NGOs, scientists, the media, the public? What do you think? Quite balanced, yeah, the results. Scientists, definitely. Well, scientists should care about this. So I would say that scientists would be a target audience of any of those, these kind of examples that I'm giving you, because they have a genuine interest here. It's quite interesting to see how this is balanced, because when I prepared this sentence, I was actually targeting managers. Of course, this also applies to NGOs, to scientists, media, and the public. But my main concern is, how do I trigger the interest of managers on this topic? Because the way that we are going to communicate to the media and to the public and to scientists will probably not trigger the interest of managers. And for me, triggering the interest of managers was quite difficult. Why should they care about a paper on the evolution of color morphism in tiny shrimp that live in the coastal areas of Brazil? And of course, the bottom line here is that there's no single solution to a single problem, but some of these audiences are more difficult to address. I have here other examples on how I would frame this. For instance, we could say that coastal eutrophication, biodiversity conservation, and phase shifts in marine ecosystems would be topics relevant for NGOs. Well, for scientists, maybe we can tune up a little bit the way we are talking about this in terms of resource availability, variation between habitats, individual differences, etc. For the media, well, sometimes it's a bit tricky, but a better understanding of the modifications we are making in our coastal habitats, like invasive species, pollution, even climate change, are affecting biodiversity and evolution of species. And for the general public, well, I could tell a story. You know, when I was, as a young kid, I was playing around seagrass meadows in Brazil or in wherever during my summer breaks, and I was just playing around and looking for tiny shrimp and mussels and fish. And this is just a reminder of my good times when I was younger. And well, your kids will see a different story, of course. Maybe they don't will not be able to play around with shrimp because there's climate change and pollution that is, you know, degrading our habitats, and it will drive a biodiversity loss. Of course, these are all examples and very generalistic examples on how to frame a story. And there's still a long road until you communicate your findings, but you need to start in a broad way that will target an interest, targeting emotions of your audience. And you have to start it in a way that is general, that is broad, and that is customized to your audience. And then if they are interested, they will be motivated to learn more about your study and your findings, etc. So in terms of the visuals, this will be a little bit faster. Yesterday I showed you this kind of information in terms of the way you communicate being too wordy or pictorial or no detail or detail, and these 4 different groups of the way that you are showing your information. And basically here I'm just going to show you a few examples that we have prepared to our clients in my company, and how we built this. So on the left side you see 2 covers of activity books for kids. The first one is about the microbiome and the life in the gut, and the second one is about protecting wildlife. And we use a type of illustration that is going to trigger some interest in kids, you know, without very vectorial lines that are more resemble to even what they can write, they can draw on their own. The middle one was asked by the University of Miami about a high impact paper on PNAS that they published about the effects that wildfires in Africa were affecting the primary productivity of the Atlantic Ocean, but most importantly of the Amazon forest. And they wanted everyone to know their findings and this connection, which is quite interesting. And this was a graphical abstract that could be used by PNAS when publishing, but also as a press release, but also as something to put on their website in a way to trigger interest and explain in a relatively simple way what's happening. On the right-hand side, you see a graphical abstract for a aquaculture journal about, here we talked about feed additives to enhance the growth response of shrimp. And here the audience is for sure quite specialized. You can see the amount of information that goes from the kids cover to the right side. It's huge, and on the right side you'll probably have to spend, you know, a few minutes understanding what this means. But if you are working in aquaculture or with shrimp, I'm sure this will trigger your interest and motivate you to spend a few minutes of your time understanding what this means. Here, so basically, the bottom line is know your audience again. Here I show you 3 examples. The middle one I showed you yesterday. And I'd like to ask Katrina to send us next question regarding the figure on the left side with the bacteria strains and the mammalian species. Who do you think it could be the audience of this figure? Policymakers, managers, NGOs, scientists, the media, or the public, or all of them? Quite dynamic, the responses. Nice. Okay, so quite balanced between scientists, the media, and the public. I totally agree with you. Although this figure was originally prepared to a company to communicate about microbial diversity to their clients, who are managers and farmers, I totally think that this could be used to communicate to the media or to the public, because basically what we want to say here is that diversity, of course there's some text missing here, but the genetic diversity between the microbial species is much larger than the genetic diversity between humans and mice and monkeys. So it's a very easy way to show something that people know and easily recognize, which are mice, chimpanzees, and humans, and how this can be related to bacterial diversity. And here I would say it's an illustration, not only on the visual side of it, but because people can look at it and identify with their daily lives and things that they know. So basically, I would say general public or the media, I agree with you. A specialized audience, like we talked yesterday about the fish farming cycle. The right-hand figure, definitely for scientists, because it's just showing data without any, I think the only thing that triggers interest here is the colors and not really the data, unless you are really into this. So moving on to the digital platforms. I will not talk a lot about digital platforms. I want to briefly say that whenever you use digital platforms, it's really important to know the answers to what are you communicating? Why do you want to communicate? How are you going to communicate? In which platform? When? Sometimes even the time of the day matters, if it's vacation month or if it's weekends. Who is your audience? You know, if they are using Twitter, or if they are scientists, or if it's young people using TikTok and Facebook. Well, not Facebook, not anymore, but if they are using WeChat in China. So this varies a lot with country to country. And I know a little bit about how it works in some countries, but for instance, if I think about how to communicate to an Asian community, I have no idea what's the best platform, because they use it in a different way that we do in our own countries. And also, seriously think about the resources you have available. It's really nice to say and see things in communication, communicating science and all kinds of communication in social media, but they require design skills, they require video skills. If you're just writing a post in Twitter, they require creative writing skills. So make an intelligent and wise use of digital platforms to communicate, and because otherwise you can just fail in the way that you're communicating because you are not prepared to do a nice illustration or a nice video or a provocative tweet. So the bottom line here is really think about all these questions and which is the best platform and what is the best way to communicate it. I'll show you this plot that I found a couple of weeks ago. It was published a few years ago on Nature, and this is the paper was comparing how different people or how scientists use the different social media platforms. It compared multiple platforms, and the bottom line and the take-home message is that Twitter is really the main social media platform for scientists to communicate their findings. So basically here we see that scientists use Twitter a lot to follow discussions, also to post and work content, to discover content from their peers and novelties that they have published, to discover recommended papers. And so if your goal is to communicate to scientists and to peers, definitely Twitter is the selection, the social media platform you should use. Of course, that there are tons of digital platforms from Instagram, YouTube, WeChat, WhatsApp, TikTok, tons of different options for different audiences, and it's impossible to be active in all of them. Well, if you have a good scientist life, you cannot be active in all social media platforms. And so, and this is my personal opinion and what we do in our company to our clients in terms of being active in social media. I want you to critically think about this. Digital platforms are the gateway for building an online communication. But they are they have very short time span. So it will go through, the information will go through your audience for a brief seconds, sometimes a few minutes, and it's gone. It's there if you want to search for it, but who goes on Twitter and search for things that were posted 1 year ago? So I think the contents in social media are very volatile. They are a good way for communication, but you should think that they should be backed up somewhere. And websites nowadays are really the anchor, the central point of communication for companies and for research groups, etc. And so whenever you think about digital platforms, think about the cost efficiency of producing contents, and think about who is going to produce them. And I want you to think about this and ask this next question: who is going to produce and maintain your social media as a research group, not as individuals? Because as individuals, for sure you will do it yourself. But in universities, is there a SciComm office, a science communication? Will you have money to pay to an external service provider to do this for you? And what happens most of the time, and as we are seeing now, you will do this yourselves. And when we ask, small companies as well and universities, there's usually someone out there, a single individual that is either producing the science and the contents, and they don't have enough expertise in either creative writing, in design, in video skills. So choose the platform that is most appropriate to your audience, but also to the way that you are able to communicate. And I just want you to think about what are the time that you can allocate to this, your skills and expertise, and seriously and critically think about it. And with this, I want to end up this webinar today, and I want to take advantage of these pooling questions and ask the last question. And I need your feedback as well. Did you find this information relevant and helpful for you? And I'd like to know if you learn new things, if most of these things are just not new to you and it's just a different angle, or not at all. And I'm happy with any feedback. All the feedback is nice and important, and this will help me for the next time to try to adjust these contents better to the audience. And I'm really happy to know that a large majority of the people learn new things and will think about these things the next time that you are communicating your science. So with this, I'd like to finish, and thank you very much for being out there listening to me.
Okay. Thank you, Miguel. It was great again. I forgot to mention in the beginning that you could ask your questions through the Q&A. I see that there are 2 questions. Please write down your questions, and I will be happy to direct them to Miguel. But to give a few minutes, I have a question. It seems to be that writing a good and concise and to the point article is not a sort of a out of the blue thing. You have to plan it. Mm-hmm. You have to have all these, like, it looks like a mathematics, isn't it? You have to have the build your equation by adding all these coefficients and so on. So it seems to be a lot of planning and a lot of thinking thoroughly. And the main idea, to stick to the main idea, seems to be the major thing, isn't it?
Yes, I agree with you. And, we should all be spending a lot of time and efforts making sure that the way we are writing is well structured, and even think about each comma that we place. Of course, that we also have to be pragmatic, and cost efficiency is also important, and sometimes we don't spend enough time in a writing process because it's not going to a high impact journal, for instance. And that happened to me in the past, and I'm sure it happened to most of the people, because you cannot dedicate the same amount of time to all types of outputs that you write. But if you think about these questions and these tools, and if you use them more frequently, I hope that it improves the way that you are communicating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's one question and a comment from Robert Fisher. Mm-hmm. He says that in contemporary science communication, is there a space for speculation? And for example, in older literature, our colleagues often tend to speculate based on their studies, something I personally enjoy. In contrast, nowadays I see that the experience based on speculations are avoided. Yeah.
I agree.
What do you think of it?
I totally that sometimes speculations is what drives, a crazy idea is what's going to drive the advance of our knowledge. And this nowadays is heavily criticized. I feel that sometimes myself, I try to put these tiny bits of speculation only in the discussion section, because it's the only place where there is room for speculating tiny bits. But I feel that some journals are changing the way that they have these stricted formats, and have sometimes viewpoints and opinion articles where there is actually room to speculate. And so I think that depending on the journal, there's more space to speculate than in others.
Yeah. Okay. There's another question from Maram Guran. That's sort of a I might be misspelling the name, but says that I read somewhere that the scientific literature is becoming more technical in the last decades. The information on the sentences length you show us made me think, do you think those two things can be related? Maybe we are trying to make sentences shorter using more technical words. Which of those things is the worst? I don't know.
Well, personally, I don't, and again, this is my opinion. I don't think there is this trend to become more technical. In some journals, definitely. And I can talk about my example. A few years ago, when I was in Switzerland and I was writing a manuscript for Trends in Ecology and Evolution, which was sort of my first, let's say, higher impact journal in my career. And I put a lot of effort into writing very short words with super fancy ecology and evolution terms. And in the end, the result was quite technical and quite short and terrible to read. And with the help of my advisors, we tuned it down. So it was not really needed to use fancy concepts and fancy words and use a 5-word sentence where all words were complex. So I feel that it's not really related with technicalities. I think it's more related with our span of attention and being able to be focused on reading a long sentence.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. There is another comment and a little bit of a question. Says that, can you give a little bit more information about your company for this outreach activities? That probably there's an interest to work with you there by Catherine.
Okay.
Besides giving these kind of trainings, what would you do for like these outreach activities?
Well, I was trying to avoid talking a lot about my company. That it was not, the goal is not really to sell our services. I think that science outreach,
I guess there is a need for this. I see.
I think there's a need. I think in the private sector, there's a need for this. There are communication agencies, some of them now starting to focus on science. But I think the way I see this is there's a lot of universities that now have a communication office that is putting effort into writing press releases, etc. Still, what happens a lot of the times is that they ask the scientists themselves to do this job. And I don't think that's correct, because there should be someone expert in communicating science doing this kind of information. And then again, you need the design help. You need to illustrate and do infographics. And there, I think it's important to hire external services like the ones we provide, where there's a combination of scientists and designers that can talk and brainstorm and put this together. Because universities, as far as I know, don't have the resources to pay a communication office with the designers, with the filmmaking team, and with a copywriter. So that's one niche that we are exploring as a company. Mm-hmm. But yes, and definitely it's things that we are doing. Not most often to the private sector, because universities either do this themselves or don't have the resources to hire an external company. But what we're trying to do is to make sure that people that are submitting new grant proposals, and we are now being part of European proposals as the science communication partner in charge of that work package, because it's something that is relevant. And if you have a proposal and project money to cover these expenses, then it's easy. You don't have to find other creative sources of money to pay for these services.
Yeah. I guess there are, I mean, besides the web page of your company, there are also Twitter and other addresses that I mean, the attendees or the participants of these webinars can reach to you through those addresses, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. There is a question. It says that, how about the adverbs in the beginning of the sentences? Are there there's some guiding rules for their use? And addition to this, sorry, it's together,
Okay.
I think. Those adverbs appear to be better linked, connected to the sentences. What do you think about it? It's
This is
by Diago Alago Dor asking the question.
I think these are good questions, and I apologize in advance that I'm not going to give you a good answer because I'm a Portuguese and I'm not a very proficient, not even in Portuguese grammar and English, and so I try to avoid focusing my talk on English and grammar skills because I don't feel that that I have the skills to do it. And honestly speaking, the way that I've been writing myself is by learning, by doing, by reading a lot, and by practicing and having a gut feeling. And I am sorry that I cannot give you specific guidelines and rules on how to use properly adverbs and verbs and all kind of grammar details.
You're just giving us a really nice tool to implement. Like I will go back to, I mean, I will definitely with my research group go back to my old abstracts or the abstracts written in different times, you know, and then implement this, because these are really nice. Like you can have a tick box on.
Yeah.
You know, you can check it, and then by practicing it become a way of writing probably, you know. And the writing is usually, I found it as a non-native speaker, is through imitating, reading the others and imitating how they present their results.
Definitely, yes.
Now I have a tool to also how to do it in a systematic way. I think we should see what you presented to us as a nice tool that we need to work on it and practice on it.
And I should acknowledge Jens. You know, most of these things with writing I learned with him when I was doing my PhD. So I should make a public acknowledgement to the one who first taught me about these writing skills.
Yes, yeah, Jens writes really good as well, that we have succeeded 2 projects by his leadership. So through the EU, so he is definitely a good writer. There is one question, I think. What is your tip for giving conference talks, I suppose, at hard times, like just before or after lunch, the last talk of the conference?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Able to choose, I suppose, because most of the time the conference organizers just laid out the timing of the talks. We have no saying for it, but if you are to choose, I suppose, yeah.
Well, I hate being the last one to talk because either you have a super interesting abstract and title, but even then, most people book their flights to leave before the last day, or because the party is usually the day before and people don't wait for the last day. So it's not something that we can choose, unfortunately. And the tips I can give you is really to make sure you prepare and make a good job, regardless of having an audience of 5 persons or 500 persons, because that's how you build your name. And if people start to see that you're a good speaker, the organizer will move you to the first place in the next ones, and you'll have more people staying for your talk. Of course, as a student, this is not going to happen. You have to build your name, build your narrative, and make sure you write a very appealing title and abstract when you submit it, so that the organizers think that it's worth putting in a highlight. And again, prepare your talk in a way that it's not, just try to remember the slide with the emotional feedback. Maybe you have to provide a more exciting talk and less boring with some more examples or more visuals or more animations. It's in terms of the way that you present with your body language as well. Ask questions directly to the public, wake them up, and if needed. So in webinars, this is completely different.
Yeah, thank you. And there's one last question, but before then, I would like to make a reminder. These videos and the talks, the presentations will be available in some media channels that we have for the Aquacosm and AquacosmPlus projects. And we will let you know when they are available, because for the video we need some trimming, I suppose, in the beginning or maybe end. And also I would like to remind you that we will continue with these webinars for training and knowledge transfer. And please stay tuned to us. And the next one will be in September. It's about video filming, how to have effective and fun way of disseminating your science or your results through video filming, because we do all visual things, you know, like do the experiments, mesocosm experiments and also continue with the work in the lab in everything that can be visually sort of disseminated to the wider audience. So we will learn some more techniques about it. So, and the last one I will say from Gülce, she says that in some papers you feel like you are reading a book, that the writers are very advanced in storytelling, more like a novel. But however, in the others you feel like you are reading a report, more like a robotic, you know. How would you find the balance between following all these guidance, like, you know, the focus to the main idea and do not repeat yourself and all these things that you listed would make us like a good writer? I think that's what Gülce is wondering.
I hope so, and I feel that, in my opinion, it's better to be reading a novel than a report. If I'm communicating, you know, or trying to know more about the field. Of course, if I'm an expert on that area, maybe I'll just jump into the results section, and the report, more robotic style, is more relevant, because what I really want is the data and not really the story. So again, it's to think about the audience, the way that you're writing. There's no perfect story, there's no perfect way to write, because you cannot reach all the communications with the same writing style.
Yeah.
But do the best you can, and try to I personally like the storytelling approach, and if you are communicating to a broader audiences, social media, etc., I think that's the way to go, honestly. But again, I'm sure there's people with different opinions and different interests as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is, let me check if there's any more additional thing. No, that's it. I think for this yesterday and today, we have really heard really nice tools to how to approach to our writings and how to approach to our communications in other means like presentations and so on. You have given us a nice toolbox, I think, Miguel. And now the ball is in our pitch now to work on it and implement it. And we could all start with like going back to our abstracts or others' abstracts and train ourselves. And the more we train, the better it will be, I suppose. And thank you very much. And thank you for all the participants. I think we have achieved today also, I must say, 66 people. So it's just like out of 85 people who showed the interest to join it, we achieved quite a good number. But through video, sharing these videos and the presentations, probably we will reach to the more, and you pass the message. Thank you. I think it was great.
Thank you very much.